On this joint episode of The Uncover Up and My Nuclear Life, we'll be looking at the worst doomsday devices of all time.
This is only a test.
For most ideas, we consider them the worst if they would be ineffective at their tasks. For doomsday devices, it's the opposite. The better they are, the worse they are. We'll be grading each device out of 5 on the following criteria. What is their potential destructive power? How far did the program get in development? What's the likelihood it would be used? What's its potential to go wrong accidentally? And style. My worthy opponent today is Dr. Shelly Lesher, professor and chair of physics at North Carolina A&T State University and host of the podcast My Nuclear Life. Shelly, welcome.
Thank you, and I look forward to rating your devices.
I'm going to start gently with a device that was designed to be employed during doomsday rather than something meant to cause doomsday. The Sputnik program in the late 1950s made it clear that the age of the nuclear bomber was coming to an end. If the Soviets could put a satellite into orbit on a rocket, they could put a warhead into an American city on a missile. That meant that many of the defenses that had been designed, surface-to-air missiles and jet interceptors, wouldn't work to protect the country. Something new needed to be developed, something bigger, something weirder. And nothing could be bigger or weirder than using the Earth itself as both the fuel and ammunition for a defensive weapon. Now, Nicholas Christophilus was a Greek physicist who got the attention of American physicists after World War II when he sent them his specs for a particle accelerator. After it was determined he wasn't a Soviet spy, he was hired on at several American radiation labs, including Livermore National Laboratory, where he worked on one of the key projects of the time, a defense for nuclear missiles. In the early 1960s, several solutions were proposed. ARPA proposed the BAMBI program, which stood for Ballistic Missile Boost Intercept, in 1961. And amongst other plans, it was suggested to build large orbital space stations that would shoot immense nets down on Soviet missiles as they were being launched. This was eventually deemed impractical. But back in 1958, the Van Allen radiation belt was discovered. It was composed of high-energy charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. Christophilus wanted to figure out a way to use something similar to create a kind of ionized particle barrier over the United States to interfere with enemy ICBMs. If there was a layer of radiation in the upper atmosphere, the electronics in those missiles would be fried as they passed through, and the missiles would fall to the ground without exploding. Which is better? The question was how to recreate that layer of radiation and place it where it could be useful. Christophilus argued that you could do so by exploding nuclear weapons in the upper atmosphere, which would trap beta particles in Earth's magnetic field. Christophilus called this effect the Christophilus effect, and during Operation Argus in 1958, the American government tested the concept by firing low-yield nuclear weapons into the upper atmosphere over the South Atlantic Ocean. It was a large-scale experiment featuring 9 ships and 4,500 crew, most of whom weren't told that they were headed out to do a nuclear test. However, the nuclear explosions were reasonably successful in creating a momentary electron belt in the upper atmosphere, which could potentially have deactivated the arming mechanisms of ICBMs. Also, the sight of the ionized particles in the magnetic field was apparently very pretty. But it's here we move from the established and verified into the murkier world of underdocumented speculation and proper Cold War madness. Because Christophilus had another plan to generate the Christophilus effect to create a protective ionized defense over North America. But this was going to require something a little more dramatic than just a few nuclear warheads. Rather than an umbrella of radiation, Christophilus was picturing an accelerator blasting a concentrated beam of charged particles at incoming missiles. In fact, an array of nuclear warheads was just the opening salvo in this plan. Christophilus wanted to melt enormous tunnels under the ground in which to build the world's largest particle beam cannon to frizzle the electrics of incoming enemy ICBMs. These tunnels could be, according to Christophilus, created through the use of a nuclear reaction, claiming, quote, "Think of it like a suppository. We would push it through the rock. As it goes into the rock, it melts the rock. It creates this perfect tube. You just have to keep on pushing it so it's hot enough so it melts the rock." Side note, I both think and hope that this isn't how suppositories work. But even if you accept the nuclear suppository method of tunnel drilling, there are still some issues to be addressed. One is that to fire up a particle beam cannon that large would require more power than the entire United States used over the course of a day. But in the same way that the Earth's magnetic field could be employed to help create an ionizing barrier, so could the Great Lakes be employed to make a lot of power in a short burst of time. Now, this part has been reported by reliable sources, although not entirely confirmed, but apparently all that would need to be done would be to build a hopelessly large hydroelectric plant underground below one of the Great Lakes. Then, place nuclear warheads on the floor of the lake, or the ceiling of the underground hydro plant cavern. Then, when you needed a quick bit of energy, you blow out the bottom of the lake. The water then all drains into the hydro plant, instantly creating a massive amount of power, and confusing and alarming an even larger number of fish and boat captains. This is Project Seesaw. We have scant evidence about the specifics of Seesaw, but we have enough documentation to know that it was evaluated by top-level Jason scientists. But where it loses points in feasibility, it makes up for in scale and madness, aka style.
I'm disturbed by the nuclear suppository, so thank you very much for that image, Nathan.
Me too.
So potential destructive power. I think I give it a 3 out of 5. While I think it is greatly destructive to the Great Lakes, I'm not sure it's destructive to our enemy. Primarily, it's destructive to ourselves. How far it got in development? 3. I think it got pretty far in development as the Jasons got involved, and I believe they actually got funding
Yeah, there was
for
some
it.
amount of funding for this for sure. And of course,
Wait,
Operation Argus.
likelihood it would be used, I gave it a 1. I don't see how this could possibly be used. It's completely unfeasible as far as a weapon goes. Potential to go wrong accidentally, I gave a 1 because there's a lot of things that could go wrong. I don't think it could accidentally go wrong. Style, though, it's pretty high up there. I'm going to give it a 5 on style.
Ooh, a straight up 5 on style for
I think
Seesaw.
anytime you get the Jasons involved, I think you got full style points there.
That's true. The introduction, actually, if you could quickly explain who the Jasons are for anybody who doesn't know.
Yes, the Jasons were or are, do they, I believe they still exist, a group of highly intelligent and high-ranking scientists that get together to talk about very outlandish ideas. And you have to be invited to the Jasons.
So the fact that Seesaw was looked at by the Jasons automatically, it's got some style.
It's got style.
Okay, so then if you tally up the score for Seesaw, how'd it do?
13.
13 out of 25. All right, well, you're up.
My first pick has the ability to cause physical damage to critical infrastructure. This means power plants, financial systems, and things like water supplies. It can slowly degrade these systems from behind the scenes, working undetected, wreaking havoc, and then maybe one day unleashing chaos and destroying our digital empire. Are you scared?
I mean, a little scared. I'm always a little scared.
Well, that's true. Okay. In all this time, it doesn't even destroy itself. I'm talking about computer malware, specifically the world's first known digital or cyber weapon, Stuxnet. In 2010, a company in Belarus was called in to inspect computers at the Natanz primary enrichment facility in Iran. What that means is the Natanz enrichment facility was using centrifuges to enrich uranium. And at that time, there was questions on were they enriching it to weapons grade uranium or just to uranium used in nuclear power plant. At this time, when the company was called in, they identified a set of code that forever would be known as Stuxnet. So this computer worm was created to attack a Siemens industrial control system. So it's a very specific thing it was set to attack. And these control systems are widely used. They control a variety of items such as stoplights or something as simple as a belt at a chicken processing plant. The computer worm would lay dormant unless 2 very specific conditions were met. 1, it found the Siemens industrial control system, and 2, that control system was attached to a centrifuge. The people who created this worm knew exactly what components the Iranians were using. So if the worm found these 2 things, it would reprogram the device and take control of the centrifuges, all without the operator knowing. Why is this important? Iran was enriching uranium using this series of centrifuges. The more centrifuges you have, the faster it is to create weapons grade material. The worms sped up the centrifuges, causing them to fail early. It's estimated that 1,000 of them were destroyed in this way. In the months leading up to this find, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, had noticed the Iranian centrifuges had been failing at an alarming rate. Later, the computers that the centrifuges were attached to started crashing and rebooting for no reason, which is what led to the outside firm being called in and finding this malware on the computers. The Stuxnet was so advanced that it was obvious that some sort of intelligent agency was involved. It wasn't just some kids in the basement. What's interesting is this is the first time cyber warfare had been waged, and there's a lot of speculation about what else can be attacked using malware.
I am a little bit unsettled by that. Potential destructive power is interesting because it entirely depends on what it's able to infect. Like, so much of our modern lives have to do with the Internet of Things. Like almost everything is connected. Power grids, and as you said, stoplights. So you could run the gamut, everything from like minor little pranks to events that would interfere with the operations of a city. So I'm going to say for the potential destructive power, I'm going to give this one a 3.
Okay.
How far did the program get in development? Obviously 5. It's out there. It's in the world. It is interacting with things. It is existing as a virus, even if it, at this moment, it is inactive. It could be reactivated any time. So 5 out of 5 for how far it got.
And actually, the code, you can actually go online and download Stuxnet and retool it.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
And so,
just in case you were interested.
right. So the likelihood it would be used, also 5. Potential to go wrong accidentally. Because it's a virus, because once you release control of it, you don't necessarily get to dictate what it does, I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. But style is where this one gets hurt a little bit, I think. While it is catastrophically destructive, it's not particularly stylish. And what I mean by that is I wouldn't necessarily watch a movie about it. And so for style, this one gets hurt and comes in at 2.
I would agree with that. The other thing is, while it could be destructive, I don't know that it's going to end the world.
Also true. I mean, it does pretty well, though. I mean, this one did better than I was expecting, and so I believe it comes in at 19 out of 25.
That's not bad.
Not bad at all, but I bet we can get better, by which I mean we can get worse.
Excellent. What do you got for me next?
For the next entry, we'll be moving from the digital level to the biological level. Because there are many ways of ending our world, and not all of them are loud and obvious, as we have just seen. Some of them are silent and insidious, and I've got one of those. Because germ warfare has a long history, and that's not surprising. When we look back at the times humanity has been almost wiped out, it's been germs that have been doing the wiping. Our history is filled with devastating plagues that have sometimes killed millions of people at times when there weren't that many millions of people to go around. So whenever it came time for the deliberate extermination of populations, plague and disease were go-to methods. In the 18th century, colonizers used smallpox blankets against the indigenous population of what's now called America. In the first half of the 20th century, the Japanese army assembled Unit 731 to experiment on unwilling prisoners and unconsenting populations, and the British, the Americans, the Soviets, they all had biowarfare programs during the Cold War. Almost nobody's hands were clean of germs. The irony is, just as humans were getting better at treating or even eradicating diseases such as anthrax and smallpox, we were getting better at weaponizing diseases such as anthrax and smallpox. Because of the existential threat these programs posed, there was an unusual amount of agreement from most of the world's powers in 1972 when the Biological Weapons Convention Treaty was signed to prevent the development or production of biological weapons. And, thanks to that treaty, the powers had to be both quieter and sneakier when they developed and produced biological weapons. In particular, let's look at the Biopreparat program of the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. It was a large project employing over 50,000 workers overseen by the KGB under top-level secrecy. They were working on weaponizing biological agents. It isn't enough just to release a germ. It first needs to be made more virulent and deadly, and then you need to figure out a vector to distribute it. Maybe infected insects, or some sort of aerosolized spray, or a bomb-style delivery system. Amongst the diseases that biopreparat engineers were gathering were, of course, anthrax and smallpox. It's hard for secrets not to leak out of a project like that one. It was also apparently hard for germs not to leak out, as the people of Sverdlovsk discovered in 1979 when a lab tech forgot to replace a clogged air filter, resulting in at least dozens of deaths from anthrax amongst the local population. But a disease showed up in Marburg, Germany in 1967 that showed great apocalyptic promise. It was a hemorrhagic fever that could be spread from human to human through direct contact or through a secondary medium, such as clothing or bedding. The symptoms of Marburg are similar to the more well-known Ebola virus, as is the lethality. One difference between the two is that there's a vaccine and treatment options for Ebola, but not for Marburg. And since the consequences of contracting Marburg can often include having your organs liquefied, including your brain, the lack of treatment or vaccine is particularly chilling. Although, obviously, that could just be the fever kicking in. Now, thanks to an incubation period of up to 3 weeks, Marburg could quietly spread through a population for some time before anybody knows that it's happening. And because, unlike, say, nuclear bombs, disease outbreaks can occur naturally, a state or a non-state actor could launch an attack on a population and maintain plausible deniability, reducing the chances of retaliation. This combination of quiet lethality makes Marburg an ideal tool to cause terrible damage. And so, in 1988, in a Siberian lab, biopreparat technicians were hard at work trying to investigate how to turn Marburg into a bioweapon. One of the scientists was a 44-year-old, well-liked family man named Nikolai Ustinov. Dr. Ustinov was performing research on Marburg, trying to concentrate it into a more lethal and stable form. He was about to inject a dose into a guinea pig when the animal squirmed in his hand, causing Dr. Ustinov to accidentally inject himself in the thumb instead. Immediately, emergency measures were taken, not to save Dr. Ustinov, that plague ship sadly had already sailed. He was isolated from the rest of the employees to prevent any further breakout, and his family came to say goodbye from a protective distance and from behind a protective barrier. Dr. Ustinov continued working at first, describing the symptoms with a professional's eye, even as his own eyes began to bleed. For days he would come in and out of fever-induced delirium and unconsciousness, sometimes to describe the disease progression, sometimes to ask about his family, and sometimes to cry. 2 months later, Dr. Ustinov's organs had dissolved and he was killed. His corpse, of course, was still dangerous as a biohazard, and he was wrapped in plastic sheeting and placed in a metal box that was welded shut. However, before this was done, other biopreparat scientists had performed an autopsy and tested some of the Marburg virus taken from his body. When they tested it, they realized that while it was killing Dr. Ustinov, it had also mutated into a more viral and dangerous form. It was both more powerful and more stable. And so, before Dr. Ustinov was buried, wrapped in plastic and sealed in a metal case, the doctors harvested more of the virus out of his corpse for further testing and use, maybe to be placed in an aerosol dispenser, maybe in a missile warhead, maybe to mysteriously show up in a busy and bustling city. This new, deadlier version of the virus was called Variant U, in Dr. Ustinov's honor, and in humanity's horror. A device like this hides and creeps rather than exploding. It's not strictly a doomsday device, but it could easily be a doomsyears device.
I don't want a virus named in my honor.
No, you never want any kind of sickness named after you. That can't go well.
No, no, no. I think this though hits a lot of the marks. And as mentioned, it's not an instantaneous doomsday device, but I will say the potential destructive power, I'm gonna give this a 4. Although it is not an immediate destructive power, it's definitely destructive. 5, it definitely got as far in development as killing its maker. Likelihood it would be used, I'm going to give it a 3 only because let's hope that people have the sense not to use something like this because it's not, and this goes with the potential to go wrong accidentally. There's no guarantee that it's not going to affect the country of origin. So although you're going to use it on your enemies, it's going to be used on you because especially this particular disease or virus doesn't have an antigen yet. So it can definitely go wrong accidentally. Potential to go wrong accidentally is a solid five. It is clear from even this story that it did go wrong accidentally.
That's a good point.
And then style, I don't think it's very original. As mentioned, disease warfare has been a staple since the beginning of time. So I'm going to give that a three.
Yeah, that seems fair. So then what does variant U clock in at
Let's see.
in our rating system?
20.
20. Okay, not bad. I mean, we are increasing in scope and we're increasing in score. So
That is true.
So let's see what you got.
My number two pick is the largest nuclear bomb known to man.
Oh, that's got to be Zarbama.
No,
What?
actually.
But
No,
Zarbama
no.
was already hopelessly large. Zarbama
That's
was
true.
absurdly, ridiculously large to the point where I was thinking of using it in this shootout.
Project 602 by the Soviets was a 100 megaton bomb, which was hinted at a meeting, and the US press went nuts talking about how crazy it would be. The US was outraged, but the Soviets said in order to get to 100 megatons, we need a proof of concept. That's when Tsar Bomba was eventually tested on October 30th, 1961. And Tsar Bomba was 50 megatons, and that is the largest bomb ever tested. This got the US scientists thinking about super bombs. But this wasn't good enough for Teller. Edward Teller, of course, father of the hydrogen bomb. His idea was at the 10,000 megaton bomb design. So,
Uh,
so are you picturing that? Not
I can't picture
10,
that.
okay, not 10 megatons, but 10,000 megatons or 10 gigatons.
Aren't you basically just making a star at that point?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
And that's what I'm going to tell you about, which comes in at number two, which is sundial. Was this a serious proposal by Teller? We're not sure, but it was an idea and it had a name, sundial. What would that look like? Well, it would be too big to fit on a plane, but it wouldn't matter because at 10 gigatons, it would destroy the world. So we're just going to leave it where it's built. The idea seemed to be some sort of Russian nesting doll of nuclear bombs, where the inside one would explode, setting off each layer of bombs. So let's put it at the Nevada nuclear testing site when it explodes. For a brief moment in time, a fireball of pure energy appears on the horizon. It's about 50 kilometers in diameter. Heat radiates at the speed of light, which means everything within 400 kilometers or 250 miles is instantly set on fire. So, where our bomb is in Nevada, that means that everything between Nevada and Los Angeles in California is going to be on fire. The Nevada desert turns to glass from the heat.
That's going to help with the style points.
Thank you. Next is the blast, and that explosion sends debris violently into space. This causes a magnitude 9 earthquake, which shakes the whole of the US. The blast reverberates around the world, and North American fires burn. This soot from the fires is added to the radioactive fallout, which creates a toxic death cloud. This toxic death cloud is going to work its way around the world and bring about nuclear winter. The global temperature will quickly drop to about 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Most water will be undrinkable. Crops will fail. Everyone will die. That's number two for me.
Oof, your number one must be genuinely terrifying. Okay, so let me score this.
Okay,
Potential destructive power. If I could give you a 6, I'd give you a 6.
thank you very much. Yeah.
But it's out of 5, so I'm giving you a 5.
Okay.
Because this is this is a world ender.
Yes, it is.
Now, how far did the program get in development? It sounds like it wasn't particularly advanced, that they had got to the point of crunching the numbers, but they weren't out doing experiments on it or anything like that.
That's correct, yeah.
So that comes in at only a 2. Likelihood it would be used, because this is so destructive, it's almost an unusable weapon, because you can only ever use it on yourself. You could never use it on someone else without also using it on yourself, unless you were doing it from a different planet. Because we're all on the same planet at this point, I'm going to say the likelihood it would be used would be maybe 1. Potential to go wrong accidentally, again, because it didn't get very far in development, I'll say a 1 for that. Style, 5.
Absolutely 5.
And so that one, interestingly, despite the fact, and maybe we should have weighted these slightly differently, because I feel like this one should have scored stronger, but I feel like that one comes in at 14, despite how destructive it is, only because it didn't get that far in development.
It's true, but I will say it fits the brief when you say doomsday device, because there's nothing more doomsday than destroying life on Earth.
Oh, no, absolutely. But I got one for you.
Okay,
Let's go back to 1957.
let's go back to 1957.
Sam Cooke and Buddy Holly are on the radio. Gunsmoke
Okay.
and Perry Mason are on the television.
I'm clutching my pearls.
And the Cold War was on the minds of the scientists at Lawrence Radiation Laboratory.
Okay.
The American military was trying to figure out how to deliver nuclear warheads into Soviet cities. Jet interceptors and surface-to-air missiles were making bombers an increasingly risky and uncertain prospect. And the first Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile had been tested, but it had only flown for about half a minute before it exploded in midair. What was a war planner to do? Well, fortunately, the answer, as it often was in the 1950s, was nuclear power. Not just in the warheads, but in the delivery system itself. What about a nuclear-powered, unmanned, supersonic low-altitude missile, or SLAM for short? And what a grand slam it was going to be. Having a nuclear engine answered 2 of the most significant problems faced by bomber designers. You could make your bomber fast, or you could give your bomber excellent range, but it was very, very difficult to do both at once, particularly when you combine those with a large payload. But a nuclear engine took range right out of the equation. Instead of measuring endurance in hours, like in a conventional jet bomber, you could measure the endurance of your nuclear-fueled engine in days. Even though the airframe wouldn't be able to take the friction, vibration, and heat of supersonic speeds for that long, it still meant that no part of the world would be too far away to reach. And the world would be made even smaller by the speeds that a nuclear engine could allow. The actual design itself was very simple, basically a ramjet. Cool air would be forced into the front of the vehicle, compressed, and then passed through a chamber in which the air would be heated by the nuclear reactor. That would cause the air to expand, and then the superheated and expanded air would then be expelled out of the back of the vehicle, allowing extreme and sustained velocities. That means, though, that this vehicle, it was called Pluto, by the way, both the project in general and the vehicle itself were given the name Pluto. This vehicle would be able to get anywhere on Earth in a big hurry and with a lot of destructive luggage. A single 1 megaton warhead is a city wrecker. 4 square kilometer fireball, 5 psi blast damage over 150 square kilometers, thermal damage over 450 square kilometers. That's a 1 megaton bomb, and each Pluto would be packing 16 of those. The sum total of all explosives dropped in World War II, including the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was about 4 megatons. So each Pluto would be packing 4 times that amount of destruction. But that's just the start of Pluto's destructive power. Because it was designed to evade radar and interception, which meant that it was going to have to fly really low and really fast. Like really, really low and really, really fast. 500 feet up, 3 times the speed of sound. And that kind of speed at that kind of height is going to have some serious effects all by itself. The series of sonic booms caused by extended supersonic speeds would create a corridor of shock pulses, damaging everything in its path. Incidentally, Project Pluto was based in a nuclear test site in Nevada named Jackass Flats, which is appropriate since that name's a combination of the sort of person who would think this project was a good idea with the resulting shape of everyone whom this missile flew over. And in addition to the shock waves, to save weight, and because who cares about a little more radiation once we're in the middle of a full-on nuclear exchange anyway, Pluto's reactor would be open cycle and completely unshielded. This meant that All the exhaust that was coming out of the back of Pluto in a big hurry had been directly exposed to ionizing radiation. According to a 1964 Air Force magazine article, there was also the possibility of fission fragments being ejected in the exhaust, which would be extremely dangerous and radioactive. The good news is that due to the speeds of Pluto, designers argued that nobody in the path would receive too prolonged a dose of radiation, although that claim requires conditions to be ideal and for nothing to go particularly wrong. And then, for style points, for its last final act of violence, the Pluto was designed to crash into one more target. Going 3 times the speed of sound, the sheer kinetic force of the impact would be on the order of a few tons of TNT, which is a large explosion, although nothing compared to the line of fireballs the Pluto would have left in its path as it dropped its payload. However, there would also be the effects of the nuclear materials, both from the reactor itself and the irradiated material of the structure of the vehicle. So, with its last explosive gasps, having run a supersonic path of atomic terror through the world, Pluto would scatter intensely radioactive reactor fragments and contaminated debris, creating a downward dispersal event that would ruin the remaining days of anyone in the dispersal zone. Now, it's worth noting that this project made it pretty far into development. There were even tests of the lethal reactors that had to be taken to and from the testing grounds with a remote-controlled train to avoid poisoning the crew. However, in 1964, Project Pluto was cancelled, in part because it was too hazardous to test fly it. In short, it was a flying sonic hazard, a multi-city eliminator, and a radiological catastrophe in one streamlined container, and a strong contender, I would say, for worst doomsday device.
I think Pluto is a strong contender. I think it's a 5 for potential destructive power, especially destroying the city with itself is definitely a nice touch. How far it got in development, I think it's clear it got pretty far. I'm going to give it a 4. They didn't actually test one. That would have made it a perfect 5.
But they couldn't. They couldn't test one. I mean, they could have tested one. It would
I
have
mean,
been
that's
a really
not my fault.
It's true. It would have been a really bad idea. Good point.
Likelihood it would be used, I'm gonna give this a 3. I think because it's unmanned, it's more likely they would have used it. There's a lot of potential for this to go wrong, so there's a 4 there. And it's a perfect 5 on style. This is a very stylish.
Oh, yeah. I mean, nuclear engine, unmanned, wreaking havoc through sonic booms and leaking off little bits of radioactive fissionable particles.
It's absolutely destructive on a lot of different levels. So I think it's got a lot of style. And I think so far, this is probably our highest one. It comes in at 21 out of 25.
I mean, 21 out of 25. Your last contender is going to have to really bring something pretty disturbing in order to compete with that.
What if an enemy retaliation attack would happen even if you launched a decapitation first strike and took out the strategic missile force? The Soviets have an answer for you. The perimeter system or dead hand.
Dead hand. So, like, I'm imagining a dead hand reaching out from the grave
Yes,
to grab you and pull you down into it.
pretty much. And dead hand is something that is talked about in movies a lot. And I'm going to tell you about the Russian dead hand and why this is my number 1 pick. So the dead hand or the perimeter system in the Soviet Union was a system in which if there were heightened tensions, the system would be activated. It would then monitor seismic events, military communications, air pressure, heat, scanning for signals the Soviet Union had been hit by a nuclear bomb. It went through a variety of yes-no situations. If turned on, did a nuclear weapon hit Moscow? Was the first if then. If yes, then it went to a link in the Soviet war room. And if the line to the Soviet war room was dead, the machine would assume that everyone in the war room was dead and would transfer launch authority to a person in the special bunker. The system would assume that there was no more Soviet command authority. The launch of the nuclear weapons then fell on the person that was in the special bunker. This bunker was designed to withstand a nuclear blast and EM pulses. So basically, you're the last person alive in the Soviet Union. The launch code would then be given, and a perimeter rocket or rockets would then launch and move across the USSR, broadcasting a radio signal that would then give launch orders to all of the nuclear silos, give launch orders to the bombers, and give launch orders to all the submarines at sea. Giving launch orders to all of the over 5,000 warheads that were aimed at different targets in the US. As recently as 2025, there have been references to the Russian dead hand system still being active. That is why this makes it my number one. It's not that this system did exist because the US also was working on a dead hand. It's that this system still exists in Russia. This means the approximate 1,700 deployed strategic weapons can be launched if this system believes that a nuclear attack has hit Moscow. Doesn't mean that it has. It means that the system believes that an attack has hit Moscow. And now with the advent of AI, it is possible that the system has been changed so that there is no one in the special nuclear bunker, but that it is controlled by AI.
Well, of course, because that would be the weak link in this flawless system, to have a human being who might make a choice, might make a decision.
And AI could actually make these yes/no decisions much faster than this old 1960s computer system could.
Right. And of course, AI has no direct access to reality, and so doesn't actually understand anything or know what's going on.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, let's score this one up. So, potential destructive power. This is world ending. So again, it gets a 5. How far did the program get in development? It got into operation. So again, clocks in at 5 out of 5.
And possibly still in activation.
Possibly still in activation, possibly tweaked to make it even more lethal. What's the likelihood it would be used? I mean, if there was a genuine attack, or if there was a mistaken attack, then it would automatically be used. And so I'm going to say 4. The potential to go wrong accidentally, this has got to be a 5. And style, it's a world ender. It gets 5, which I think means that the dead hand reaching up from the grave to grab us all comes in at 24 out of 25 and is the winner. But in a way, we're all winners.
We are all winners because in the end, we're all dead.
Right. So in another more accurate way, we're all losers.